Hello and welcome to Global Discussion on CBC channel. I am Anastasia Lavrina. Clashes in July between Armenian and Azerbaijani armed forces resulted in deaths on both sides. Shooting along the border between Armenia and Azerbaijan, as well as around the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict line, became more frequent than it was before. So what is really happening around the negotiation process over the resolution of Armenia-Azerbaijan Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, and how it has been changed since the time of the last escalation in July? Let's try to answer this question, and my guest today is the chairman of Center of Analysis of International Relations, Farid Shafiyev. Welcome to Global Discussion.
Thank you for inviting.
Mr. Shafiyev, recent events in Tovuz region of Azerbaijan between Armenia and Azerbaijan attracted the attention of the full international community. Can you comment on the reasons of the recent event in July, as I said previously, between Armenian and Azerbaijani armed forces, and overall the development in the context of the conflict between two countries?
Well, thank you. Well, let's analyze what's going on between Armenia and Azerbaijan. First, let's start with the events in Tovuz region of Azerbaijan on the international border between Armenia and Azerbaijan. There are many opinions who started first and what was going on, etc. But let's see overall military and geopolitical situation, and specifically Tovuz region. Azerbaijan doesn't have any military advantages, let's say tactical advantages, launching attack at the international border with Armenia. I believe there are four reasons which was conducive to the Tovuz clashes, and all these four reasons indicate that it was Armenia which was interested in igniting or reigniting the conflict, specifically in Tovuz region. First of all, as I said, we don't have any tactical, Azerbaijan doesn't have any tactical advantages in this region because it's the international border. It is Armenia which wanted to draw the third party to the conflict. And we witnessed that the next day after Tovuz clashes, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Armenia, Zohrab Natsikhanyan, made a phone call to the Secretary General of the Collective Security Treaty, and the information was it was the consultation, sort of consultation. The meeting was called and then postponed. Definitely, Armenia wanted to involve the Collective Security Treaty to the conflict. But specifically, I believe Armenia wanted to draw Russia. Because what happened 4 years ago, for example, in April 2016, where there was also attempt by Yerevan, the government in Yerevan, to involve Collective Security Treaty. But at that time, they received response that the occupied territories of Azerbaijan, Nagorno-Karabakh region and other adjacent regions are not the jurisdiction of Armenia, and thus it's not jurisdiction of Collective Security Treaty. But the clashes in the international border between Armenia and Azerbaijan, it gives kind of the reason for Collective Security to be involved. So I believe that was the reason why Yerevan was much more interested in Tovuz clashes than Azerbaijan. The second reason, the Tovuz region is in proximity to major international transregional energy and transport infrastructure. We know that Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan oil pipeline, Baku-Tbilisi-Kars gas pipeline, Baku-Tbilisi-Kars railroad, all goes in quite close proximity to the Tovuz region, to the clashes. And Armenia, it's kind of not secret, we are left isolated from these transregional projects because of its occupational policy towards Azerbaijan. And Yerevan is not happy that Azerbaijani gas by the end of this year will be delivered to Europe, to European market, to Italy, Greece. So threatening, I mean, making escalation exactly in this region served the purpose to threaten major energy and transport infrastructure. The third reason, I believe, is the Armenian domestic politics. We know there is the fight between the current government, Pashinyan, led by Nikol Pashinyan, Prime Minister, and other parties, whereas the so-called Karabakh clan, previous leaders, Kacharyan, who is in prison, and there is tension with Sargsyan. We've seen also the tension related to some of oppositional parties. Tsarukyan, for example, also was imprisoned, arrested. Always, I mean, it's the kind of classical method when the government would like to detract attention of the domestic audience from the domestic affairs. It uses some external threat for these purposes. And also the fourth reason, I believe, is the difficult economic situation in Armenia, especially in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. Situation became worse, and I think, again, the external threat always useful for the government to detract attention from the domestic affairs. Somebody can also claim that Azerbaijan might be interested in stirring up the conflict and channeling domestic attention to the external threat, to the conflict. But according to all available data, economic data, financial data, Azerbaijan's situation, yes, Baku, the government in Baku also feels the stress because of the COVID-19 pandemic. But the financial economic situation is much better in Azerbaijan. The financial reserves, the currency reserves, which Azerbaijan accumulated so far, it's around $15 billion. So the situation is much better in Azerbaijan. So the government was not compelled to do anything. I mean, the situation is under control.
Mr. Shafiyev, it's really interesting point and a very controversial point from the international opinion, international view, because Azerbaijan claims that Armenia started its provocation this time and also in 2016, I mean the April. And from the other side, Armenian claims that it's Azerbaijan who started this provocation. So I would like to draw your attention to the recent statement made by Armenian Prime Minister Pashinyan during his interview for BBC Hard Talk, where he said that it is necessary to establish the international mechanism to investigate the cases of ceasefire violations. And from his words, this is valid for Armenia. Your opinion, is it also valid for Azerbaijan?
The desire of Armenia to establish this sort of monitoring system, the goal of this monitoring system is to solidify status quo, especially on the occupied territories of Azerbaijan. I think Azerbaijan should openly declare that the goal of the negotiation process is desirable to have peaceful resolution, but it's not the goal. The goal is the implementation of United Nations Security Resolution. The goal is the restoration of international law, restoration of territorial integrity of Azerbaijan. Under international law, Azerbaijan has every right, self-defense, to resort to military means. But again, Azerbaijan shows a goodwill, and now for 26 years after ceasefire in 1994, Azerbaijan working on peaceful resolution through diplomatic channels. And as a former diplomat, I also prefer that eventually we'll come to the peace through the peaceful means, through diplomatic means. But I would like to stress that the non-military solution is not the goal. The goal is the restoration of Azerbaijan's territorial integrity. But looking also at the history of this ceasefire and this suggestion about establishing the control system, look what happened, especially you quoted Nikol Pashinyan. what happened at the negotiation table between Armenia and Azerbaijan for the past 2 years. Nikol Pashinyan came to power in 2018, and it was quite optimistic sentiments in the air because he was sort of pro-democracy. He was speaking about the peace, about liberal values, etc., etc. And indeed, we had some kind of time of optimism in the beginning of 2019. Leaders of two countries met in Dushanbe, and there was some sort of the elevator talks, etc. But what happened after that? In March 2019, Pashinyan tried to derail negotiation process by trying to involve the so-called Nagorno-Karabakh into negotiations. You know, the format of negotiations, the goal of negotiation is to define the status of Nagorno-Karabakh. If we will refer to the founding documents of the Minsk Conference, that's the March 1992, that's the two sides of the conflict, Armenia and Azerbaijan, elected and other officials of Nagorno-Karabakh can be drawn or invited to the negotiations table upon consultation with all parties. And in September, on 15 September 1992, chairman of the Minsk Conference, at that time it was Italy, made a statement where the chairman clarified that when we're speaking about elected and other representative of Nagorno-Karabakh, we should treat equally Armenian and Azerbaijani community. Because statement says that the chairman didn't find why Armenian community should be given more preference to Azerbaijan side. Something along these lines. I don't remember exact quote, but the essence of that statement was both communities should be involved in the negotiations. But they should be involved after some progress achieved. We don't have this progress. So, in March 2019, Pashinyan first time tried to derail the negotiation process. And then there was the meeting, summit meeting in Vienna in the end of March 2019. There was also some conversation about preparation of population to peace. And what Pashinyan did, he went to Khankendi, to the occupied territories of Azerbaijan, to launch so-called Pan-Armenian Games, and he declared that Nagorno-Karabakh is Armenian, period. Basically, again, he's derailing, destroying the Minsk format, because the goal is to define the situation around Nagorno-Karabakh, region of Azerbaijan. And then Armenia declared that basically it's the return to the old slogan, Miatsum, which is in Armenian means unification. We remember that in February 1988, Armenian nationalists began this campaign exactly with the term unification, Miatsum. And Pashinyan returned to this term. It should be noted that after gaining independence, Armenia in 1991, as well as Azerbaijan, the Armenian nationalists abandoned the term unification, because what means unification? That means enlargement of Armenian territory. Instead of this sort of, which is not well received by the international community, when one country trying to get the territory of another country. So the Armenian nationalists came with a bit smarter idea of self-determination, because self-determination draws much more sympathy, especially in the Western liberal circles. But the goal, and Pashinyan reaffirmed that, is indeed to unify, to annex Nagorno-Karabakh to Armenia. Let me continue. That was the second attempt to completely destroy the negotiation process. And the third one, this year, Armenia in March, April denied the existence of documents at negotiation tables. We know that for almost 10 years now, both sides working on the solution which is called Madrid Principles. And by declaring that there is no negotiation, there is no documents on negotiation table, basically Armenian side fully denies all results of the negotiations so far. And by the way, even like usually Moscow, Russia, has balanced approach to this conflict. Even in this case, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia, Sergei Lavrov, making comments in April 2020, he said that no, there is the documents on the table and they should be elaborated further, and both sides should work on it. And finally, I mean, on May 21st, Nikol Pashinyan went to Shusha, which is a historical city of Azerbaijan. All international experts accept that Shusha is the Azerbaijani city, I mean, culturally. And that was, I think, the quite strong provocation. And after all that, Armenia is still talking that, no, we should establish monitoring system, etc., etc. When we see that for the last 2 years, Armenia deliberately tried to destroy negotiation process. And one more thing, we're speaking about again, returning to a question about the control system. Let's look at the data. 2019 was the lowest number of casualties at the contact line. So that basically manifests that Armenian and Azerbaijan can handle and can keep this ceasefire regime. But now Armenia destroyed the negotiation process, and 2019 was indeed lost year, and we are again speaking about some ceasefire control, etc. Well, in 2019 we had perfect ceasefire, I mean a relatively perfect ceasefire. So I believe again this system of control which Yerevan is speaking is the goal of this controlling system is to solidify status quo.
And it's really interesting to know also how Armenia is able to enjoy this impunity, because as you say, there are real facts and arguments which demonstrate, from your opinion, it demonstrates a clear position of Azerbaijan and Armenia. So there are documents which should attract the attention of all international community and international institutions, but still Armenia enjoys its impunity and explains that there is no any progress in the negotiation process because Armenia has to deal with so-called authoritarian regime in Azerbaijan. How can you comment on that?
There are perhaps two questions in your sort of comments. Yes, there is frequently, especially Azerbaijani public, pose a question why indeed Armenia so far enjoys impunity. It occupied Azerbaijani territories. We have United Nations Security Council resolution, though Armenia denies kind of responsibility, and they're trying to distort the nature of these 4 resolutions. But we know that these 4 resolutions clearly indicate that occupational forces, all occupational forces, should be withdrawn from the occupied territories of Azerbaijan. So there are several factors, historical and some other factors I would like to elaborate. I would like to quote American scholar Thomas Ambrosio, who said that Armenia enjoyed permissive international regime in the 90s, specifically in 1992 and 1994, when Armenia occupied 20%, almost 20% of territory of Azerbaijan. First of all, the reason why Armenia enjoys impunity is because the religious factor which Armenian nationalists using against Azerbaijan. On every occasion, Armenian nationalists were trying to say that this is the conflict between Christian Armenia and Muslim Azerbaijan, and taking into account quite strong stereotype, especially in Western media, among Western public. You know, this is a well-known phenomenon called Orientalism. Among social historians and anthropologists, it's the concept developed by Edward Said. This perception that if conflicts happening between Christian and Armenians and Muslims, between Christian and Muslims, something should be wrong on the Muslim side. And Armenia always trying to say that this is the country Christian outpost. But what's the reality on the ground? We know that Armenia enjoys very good relations with many Muslim countries. First of all, with its neighbor Iran. Yerevan has very good relations with several Arab countries, diplomatic relations. Sometimes even we recently, there was conversation about delivery of weapons from Jordan. We know that in May this month there was footages of Iranian trucks on the occupied territories of Azerbaijan. So this is the myth which Armenia developed in the West, that were Christians who are victimized. And then related to that, it's the history. Armenia using history, the all events of 1915, trying to distort sometimes historical facts. For example, well-known reference to Stalin. Even many Western experts and historians, when they speaking about the conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan, they think Stalin gave Nagorno-Karabakh to Azerbaijan. There's nothing true in this claim. First of all, Stalin in 1920, 1921, when the question of Nagorno-Karabakh was under consideration, Stalin was not the sole and omnipotent leader of the Soviet Union. There were several in his ranks. The second, we know that the decision which so-called communist authorities, Kavbureau, which is called in Russian Kavbureau, Soviet authorities of the Caucasus adopted, it says to leave Nagorno-Karabakh in Azerbaijan. To leave, in Russian, оставить. To leave, that means that belonged to Azerbaijan, not to give. And there are several factors which Armenian nationalists is trying to portray, or let's say to put forward and try to hide some other facts. For example, the big chunk of Azerbaijani territory, Zangezur, was given to Armenia. If we're speaking about Stalin, how it happened that, for example, Lori region in Armenia, it belonged to Georgia. And in 1921, Lori was given to Armenia. So where was Stalin about? Stalin was Georgian. So, and for Stalin and some other Soviet bureaucrats at that time, it was just a game to end the ethnic conflict, to solidify the result of military occupation, and to create what they indeed later created, the Soviet Union, and the element that was the Caucasian Federation. So nothing true in that statement, but Armenian nationalists, we have for many decades, almost for century, Armenian diaspora living in the West. There are some historians, Armenian public activists, advocates. They know how to work in the Western media. They know how to work in Western academia. We're trying to put forward these myths, these falsified facts into the textbook, etc. So that's another reason, history. Third reason, victimhood. Armenia always trying to portray themselves as, again, related to other factors which I mentioned, that were victims of the centuries-old oppression by the Muslims, by the Ottoman empires, by other empires, Muslim empires. But we know that the Armenians enjoyed quite good status. For example, in the Ottoman Empire, Armenians was called Millet Sadiq, that's the loyal nation. So relations between Turks and Armenians was very good. In Safavid Empire and some other Qajar empires, Armenians had even privileges, for example, to trade silk, exclusive privileges, and some other privileges. So it's nothing true, again, in these also claims of victimhood. But especially related to events to 1915, Armenians tried to portray that. There are some other factors. I mentioned them briefly, speaking about self-determination. If we recall that in February 1988, Armenian nationalists began this campaign for unification with Armenia. It was still the Soviet Union. And the liberals in the West, they saw this conflict in the Caucasus as something which can disturb and destroy the Soviet Union. So many liberals jumped to support Armenian nationalists without going into details. What's going on? What's the history of the conflict? And further on, Armenian, especially diaspora in the West, they managed this campaign well in terms of attracting liberals, saying, you know, we're trying to get freedom from the Soviet Union. Nagorno-Karabakh is trying to get freedom from Azerbaijan, Nagorno-Karabakh Armenians. So it sounds quite well, I mean, for the liberals in the West. And, but it's not, again, nothing true in this sort of nationalist, expansionist policy, which is, based on the idea of Great Armenia. And now speaking about the Pashinyan, or you mentioned that the Armenian side claims that this is the fight between democratic Armenia and the authoritarian Azerbaijan. This is now the sort of cliche. On every occasion, Armenian diaspora organizations speaking about that. Okay, if that's true, let's for a moment to be the so-called the devil's advocate. If it's true, then the Armenian side should nullify, should remove the legacy of the previous regimes, Sargsyan and Kacharian and some others. And the legacy of the previous regime, Ter-Petrosyan, is the occupation of Azerbaijani territories. That's I think the very important factor. They claim that they became democratic in 2018 and they're trying to restructure, refashion their society, country, the government, then indeed the legacy of occupation should be removed. But the truth that indeed the democracy, so-called democracy in Armenia, has peculiar character. We know that all the scandal around the Constitutional Court, which basically the current government, Pashinyan government, removed judges acting contrary to the constitution of Armenia. They tried to bypass constitution of Armenia because through the parliament, and they did that. So many international observers now speak about violations of human rights and etc. in Armenia. But overall, I would like to stress that speaking about our region, yes, all three countries, they should continue their reforms. They should improve their governance, their system, but let's abandon these cliches, you know, especially again, these Armenian nationalists, they're using cliche like Stalin gave Nagorno-Karabakh, and now they're using another cliche, oil autocracy. So we, you know, dealing with the propaganda war. And when all these cliches, oil autocracy, you know, and another, for example, I'll give you just example, caviar diplomacy. Yeah. We're accused that we're using caviar diplomacy. Well, let me tell you, every country on earth, almost, especially countries with some either problems, conflict, or with some ambitions, United States, France, UK, Russia, China, middle powers like Azerbaijan, some other countries, Armenia, we're trying to enhance their network. This is the normal thing. It's called diplomacy. You're trying to find the friends, you're trying to find the like-minded people. And also Azerbaijan tried to do that, and I think it's the legitimate course of actions. What is not legitimate is bribing someone. But let's look at the jar of caviar. Yes, it's not cheap food. It's $200, $300 or euros on the market. But can someone imagine that you can buy politician in Europe with caviar? It's ridiculous. Let's look at the other kind of diplomacy. Someone speaks about Armenian conic diplomacy. I'm leaving that aside. In the United States, Armenian wealthy people, they investing millions of dollars into American politicians. You know, the cost of elections in the United States, I've heard different figures, but indeed enormous. It's the peculiar character of American democracy when the congressman or the senator should spend between 10 to 30 million dollars for the elections campaign. It's a huge amount of money, and they collecting the donations from people, from the corporations, and Armenian businesses, especially in California, in Massachusetts, they giving quite generous donations to American politicians. Why nobody speak about that? Why jar of caviar outweighed all these politicians?
Well, talking about Armenian so-called diplomacy in the United States, I guess I have to also ask you about ANCA. It's, I would say, famous Armenian lobby group which attracts the attention with its very, I would say, loud statements which they're doing online on Facebook, YouTube, and etc. And even the recent interview of Aram Hamparian, whom it was broadly promoted on YouTube also, where he made several remarks with regards to the history, namely to the events which took place in 1915. And he also mentioned the territorial claims to Turkey as one of the idea of restoration, Armenian restoration, and etc. So I would like to know your opinion, the role of this organization, how does it affect the full negotiation process over Armenia-Azerbaijan-Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, and his opinion about these statements which was made by the head of ANCA.
Yeah, well, it's a good example. You mentioned interview, which I've seen it. It's indeed some ridiculous, I would say, claim. For example, Aram Hamparian, who is the leader of lobby group, let's call spade a spade. It's the nationalist lobby group acting in Washington, D.C. Aram Hamparian claimed that, first of all, about, let's say, event 1915. Again, I would like to refer to previously what I've said. It's about history, how Armenian nationalists trying to misuse the history. Events of 1915, Turkish side, for example, they offered to open archives. Armenian side refused. So about events of 1915, it was the First World War. The Allied powers, Britain, France, and Russia, they tried to dismantle Ottoman Empire, and eventually they succeeded. They stirred up for many years, even before they raised the so-called Armenian question. So they used Armenian nationalists in Ottoman Empire against the central government, Ottoman Empire. So, and massacre happened. Armenians, Turkish side, the leaders, the president of Turkey, Erdogan, before he was prime minister, he made some statements about events of 1915 and also called that the tragedy. So, but Armenian refused to accept. They insist to accept term tragedy or anything else. They insist on the term of genocide. Why? Because it has legal implications, and we know that it cannot be, because the Convention on Genocide was adopted several decades later. It cannot be applied in retroactive. But why we're trying to do? Because they indeed have territorial claims. Once the genocide is accepted as a term, it's the legal term, there's a question of reparation and the territorial claims.
And there's also financial claims from this interview.
Yeah, reparation, I'm speaking about. Yeah, you're right. And if we again go back to the Hamparian's interview, he's not even speaking about the human laws, the values of human life. All he's speaking about territory, he's speaking about reparations, financial contributions from Turkey to Armenia, etc. And indeed, speaking about territorial claims, he even said that Nagorno-Karabakh, I mean, I invite people to look at this interview, he claims that Nagorno-Karabakh should be given to Armenia as a form of reparation for events of 1915.
And then you are to go back and ask for reparation. What will be the amount and what will be the request? Will it be land? Will it be give us Karabakh and it's done, it's not Azerbaijan? Will it be this is the amount of money?
Armenians existed on that part of the world alongside Assyrians and many others for thousands of years, maybe going back 6,000 or 7,000 years. The elements of viability that nourished our existence are demographics, our economic resources, our agricultural resources, our water resources, our defensible borders, all these things that sort of come together to make the equation of Armenian viability. Those were like destroyed, they were rent during 1915. And we want to bring that back together so that Armenia remains a viable state among the family of nations.
This is a completely crazy idea. I don't even want to comment too much. But overall, the problem with these ethnic, nationalist, xenophobic organizations like ANCA, they trying to use democratic platform in Western countries to promote hatred, to promote territorial claims. We're using American system with elected officials, and I would say corrupt elected officials, because those American elected officials were a few who supports Armenian cause, Polone, Adam Schiff, and some others. They elected to guard the interest of American taxpayers, to guard interest of America as a whole, as a country, as a foreign policy, not some small ethnic groups which has quite narrow nationalistic agenda, has territorial claims to several other countries. It's not only about Azerbaijan, it's about Turkey.
Exactly, it's not only about Azerbaijan, but there is a claim also to Turkey and probably Georgia even, because you mentioned Black Sea.
By the way, there is some interesting study that in 1980s, Armenian nationalists was considering what they should start first, the claim towards Azerbaijan, Nagorno-Karabakh, or to Georgia, because they have what they call Javahetia. It's the regions, what Armenians called Khalkalakia, and some other adjacent areas where Armenians live in Georgia. So, but then they decide that Azerbaijan is better choice than Georgia because of religious factor, because of the maybe weakness and much more stronger support from the West. And returning to the question of this 1915, Azerbaijan and some others, again, we're coming to the question of the history, question of religion. Events of 1915 in Ottoman Empire, as I said, it has historic conditions when the Allied power try to dismantle Ottoman Empire, and they were winning side. And we know that history is written by the winners. So that's why the events of 1915, written mostly by winners, French, British, American scholars, in one way. By the way, speaking about whether it's fact or disputed, the moment in the history, I would like to refer to the case in European Court of Human Rights, the Perenchek versus Switzerland. The European Court of Human Rights said that the events of 1915 is the legitimate subject of discussion, and one view cannot be imposed on the public, on historian, on media. But there is big stigma against Ottoman Empire, also because it has some historic conditions. If we look at all these empires, British, French, Russian Empire, Austro-Hungarian Empire, Ottoman Empire, I mean, empires it's the kind of closed page of history. They gone. I mean, most of them gone, I would say. But again, Western powers were fighting against Ottoman Empire, and they have this religious prejudice. But if we look at the Ottoman Empire, at the structure, the government, I would say that Ottoman Empire was not worse than the other empires, even better. Let's recall that the Ottoman Empire gave shelter to many Jewish refugees running from the Spanish Inquisition in 15th century. And overall, I would say the Ottoman system of governance maybe, comparatively liberal to the British or French colonizers, or look what the Spanish colonizers and the British colonizers did in North and South America. But again, it's the question of the stereotype, it's the question of Orientalism, It's a question of history, which is well manipulated by Armenian nationalists.
You know, from our conversation, I can conclude that Armenia is not going to change its position. And if we look at the negotiation process at the moment, because this is the main question of our conversation today on how the process is going now, it stopped. There is no progress, and the position of Armenian government, from your words I can conclude, is not much clear. So I would like to know your opinion, what else Azerbaijan can do to proceed this negotiation process. Probably there are some ideas on how to move it forward, and overall, if we talk about negotiation process, on what exactly Azerbaijan should focus on in near future.
Yes, first of all, we have some documents on the negotiations table. They call Madrid Principle. They should be continued, the work on this implementation. And Madrid Principle stipulates some concrete steps what should be done. First, the liberation of territories around Nagorno-Karabakh, opening communication lines, and etc., etc. The most, I would say, contentious issues of the status Nagorno-Karabakh would be postponed, but definitely it's opinion of the Azerbaijani government, public, and based on the United Nations Security Council resolutions. Let's recall that United Nations Security Council resolutions, 4 resolutions in 1993, repeatedly confirmed the territorial integrity of Azerbaijan. But I would say, before going into that deep into the situation around Nagorno-Karabakh region of Azerbaijan, there are some other occupied territories, and that situation should be resolved. The occupied military forces should be withdrawn from the occupied territories of Azerbaijan. We have this unfortunate situation when Western mediators, not Western, but OSCE Minsk group mediators, Russia, France, and United States, and by the way, in all 3 countries, Armenian diaspora is very strong, Armenian lobby group is very strong, and there's countries with historical interest in supporting Armenia, always. And we recently have seen this delivery of weapons from Moscow. We've seen the support coming from the American politicians. So it's all there. So these mediators, and also a group of international experts, there are so many, now not so many, but there are a few historians who usually quoted Tom DeWaal, Lawrence Broers, very well-established, reputable scholars. But I think the big mistake is to treat Armenia, Azerbaijan equally. I think that the time came to stop doing that. While, for example, when we're speaking about conflict in Georgia or Ukraine, for these experts, everything is clear. But when it comes to Armenia, Azerbaijan, they say, oh, it's complicated. Both sides are guilty in something, Yes, conflict happened, the violations, the human life lost on both sides. There is no question about that. And indeed, I believe that if Armenian, all these lobby groups, Anka and some others, were really interested in the fate of Armenia and Armenian people, they should think why 1 million Armenians left Armenia while they continued with occupational policy. What they would like to bring to Armenia. It's only misery and continuation of the conflict. Armenia left economically isolated, and there is no prospect of Armenian economic development. Current government trying to do something with IT, but I believe Armenia can only develop once the conflict is resolved, the borders opened, and we have good, all countries in the region have good neighborly relations. But they are not interested, because this is what's so-called ethnic entrepreneurs, like with lobby groups. We're getting money, we're trying to show, okay, we're doing this work, we're lobbying this group, these politicians, he adopted these statements, all that statement. With all statements, nothing, for Azerbaijan and for the situation. We will continue to fight for our territories. And I believe from the international mediators, coming back to your questions, they should stop treat equally Armenia and Azerbaijan. One is the victim, Azerbaijan, victim of occupation, and another is the occupying power. When we will come to that sort of the conclusion, then of course I believe the international pressure will be directed on Yerevan. There might be some changes in the policy. But Azerbaijan should continue, if we're speaking about our policy, should continue to strengthen its governance, should strengthen its army, strengthen its diplomacy, and that's the way to increase the leverage on the aggressor side of the conflict.
Let's see that there will not be another escalation on the border, and the negotiation process will be continued. At least the countries has to find the right solution for this conflict.
Yeah, let's hope.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Shafiyev, for your time, and thank you for joining Global Discussion today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you.